now we've got our 10 rows of plain weave done, so we're going to move on to the next technique, which is shapes. So we're going to be making these triangles here. So we do one triangle this way and one that way, and we'll start with this one. And so when I'm working in smaller spaces, I like to use my yarn needle. So you'll just choose a color of yarn, thread the needle, and I always like to do a double knot just so that it doesn't slip off the needle. And then if you would prefer, you can go ahead and count into the middle, or you can just kind of eyeball where the middle is, and you're going to be weaving, so make sure you're doing the opposite of the last row. So you'll just weave in to about where you feel the center is. Make sure you don't pull that tail through, and same thing, it's a plain weave, so do your arc and angle, push it down. And so then we're basically going to count this warp thread as our ending point. We're never going to go past it, we're actually going to be going in. So we'll go back, so we've got 2 rows here, so every 2 rows we go in a warp thread. And so like this one, we ended perfectly on that warp thread, so every other time it's going to be different. So now this one we want to be ending on this warp thread, but we're actually ending where this is the over, so you still pull it through. And then just make sure that you catch this when you head back to the edge. And then you just keep going until you've got one left. So again, this time it ends perfectly on this thread where you're pulling it up and through. And you can still also utilize your pickup stick. And then again, so we're left at where we want to be going into this one, but we're ending up on top of it. So when we head back, we want to make sure we pick up that warp yarn. Make sure we scoop it up and bring it back in. So then we'll just do this until we end up with just one warp yarn left. So now we've got to the end where we've got one left, and it seems kind of weird, but yes, you'll just take your weaving needle and just wrap it around that one yarn. And whenever you're ending on the edge like this with one yarn, I find it works best to just go ahead and tuck the tail right away so you don't have to worry about it unraveling. So to do that, just put that onto the back side. You can go ahead and flip over your loom, and you'll just make sure you get under that yarn, staying on the back side, and then I typically go down a few yarns. My rule of thumb is like 3 or 4 yarns, and you just go ahead and pull that through. Don't worry if you have to tug it a little bit. So then you've got that, and then you can just clip it, and then that's a tail that you just don't have to worry about. And then now we're going to get started doing the second triangle, filling in this square. So we'll choose another color of yarn. Put it on your yarn needle. I'll double knot. And then now we are starting in the center of the loom, which is different. We've always started on the ends, but we're going to start by pulling this up on the right side of this warp yarn, leaving the tail on the back side. Make sure you don't pull it all the way through, so just kind of hold on to it. And then kind of how we did where we just wrapped it around, the same thing. It's as if we're starting right here. And so we're gonna just wrap it around this first one once, making sure also not to pull the tail through. And this will just kind of help start the anchor. And so then you can just go ahead and get started by going under this one and over. And now we're going to be using this warp thread where we started. We're never going to go past it, and we're just going to keep building. In every row we'll be going adding a warp yarn. Alright, so now we've got our last row done, and kind of like how we tucked this one in, I would say, because you're ending on that one thread, why don't we go ahead and tuck that one in as well. And so same thing, pull it around to the back, and then just bring it in 3 or 4 yarns. Pull it down, and then you can just snip that, be done. So now we're going to move on to the next technique, which will be filling in this space over here on this side of the loom.